About to start the recording, so just give us one moment. Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Cabinet on the 22nd of December 2022. Firstly, I obviously would wish you all and everybody viewing a very happy Christmas and a happy and healthy 2023. Mr. Evans, we'll go to apologies for absence first. There are no apologies. Okay, disclosures of prejudicial, personal or prejudicial interest on any item on the agenda. None. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Davis.
Should the National Waterfront Museum be referred to and the Wales National Pool, I declare an interest as a director.
And Councillor, that's a personal interest only, haven't been advised by the authority.
Okay, Councillor Smith, similar for you. Okay, thank you very much. Announcements of Leader of the Council, nothing to add to what I'll be saying when we come to the budget proposal report. Okay, so we'll move then to public question time. Have we had any questions submitted by members of the public? No questions submitted. And for those colleagues online, there are no members of the public present in the gallery today. We'll move then to councillor question time. Any councillors wish to ask a question? Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you very much. And good morning and the best of the Christmas wishes and New Year for everybody. I've got a question and then a request. The question is, having read the report, which is quite considerable, I would ask, are we passporting by instruction from the Welsh Government or by what in our own decision, 10 million each to education and social services? Do we have to do that, and do we have to witness it, or do we have to prove it to the Welsh Government?
So we met with head teachers yesterday, Councillor Holly, and certainly what we've confirmed with heads was that we would passport all traceable monies onto schools, and that would be in line with the SSA arrangements and in the documents, and that is at least £10 million in terms of the RSG passport, plus any specific grants that are confirmed in due course. In addition to that, we've advised schools of additional help that we will try and provide them with as a council, including help on energy. As you know, there is no current help from UK government for any public sector, and that means that the additional £15 million worth of energy costs we're anticipating for next year, half of which are likely to be seen in schools, means that we've got to find a way locally of offsetting those costs. So the help to schools will be well and above the level provided by Welsh Government, which in itself is above the level provided by UK Government. In terms of social services, similar story. We don't have the final numbers yet, but we're anticipating a similar figure being passported through to social services. And again, we're awaiting confirmation of specific grants from Welsh Government, which again may add to the money available to social services. And again, as Mr. Smith has indicated, and I'm sure he'll reference in his comments, there are a number of reserves that we set up in the current year, but also we'll consider prudent use of reserves in the forthcoming year, which again may be of benefit to specific services across the council.
Okay, thank you for that answer. As you've highlighted in your comments with regard to this budget and the unprecedented issues that it brings up, both not only energy but actually about the level of uplift that we're having from the Welsh Government and the amount of money that's been passported to them from UK Government, and the cost, the fact that inflation is rampant at the moment. What I'm going to request is that there's briefings be given to all members. I think we're in a position, Leader, where a budget that being presented and the consequences of this budget, the fact that we will have to make substantial savings and the fact that costs are going to skyrocket through the year. So I was wondering whether or not I was requesting that we have a briefing, whether it's done as all members of council or as individual groups, that it be carried out as soon as possible in the new year.
Yes, Councillor Holly, very happy to do that. As you'll be aware, we only got the detail of the Welsh Government's budget middle of last week, and I have to commend Mr. Smith and his officers and the heads of service and directors for turning that around so quickly, and then for cabinet members meeting to discuss the implications of that settlement. That has left, unfortunately, very little time for us to be able to do that before this meeting. But of course, as we would normally do, there will both be opportunities at scrutiny for members to scrutinise the proposals in due course. But I'm very happy to arrange a specific session for members in the new year. Myself and Mr. Smith will attend to present to members and to deal with any questions that members may have.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Ada, because as you rightly said, I don't think in many years I've been in local government that we've seen the fact that we've had so much inflation and such a poor uplift, and the fact that the consequences to our staff and everyone else and the services, that's what's coming. But thank you very much for that.
No problem, Councillor Holly, and yes, you are correct. I mean, the pressures this year are around 44 million, as the document lays out. That is nearly 2/3 more than anything we saw in any single year of austerity. So it is an unprecedented scale, but I'm very, very pleased with the additional help the Welsh Government has been able to provide. That hasn't, unfortunately, been able to cover all of the pressures, and that's why there are a number of proposals in the document. But I am grateful to Cabinet and officers in the way that this has been approached in such record time to try and get us to a point of clarity so that we can go to consultation subject to Cabinet's decision today in the new year. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you once again, and likewise for the amount of time that it's taken to turn this report around has been quite commendable to everyone involved, and thank you for your observation about having a briefing session. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, if there aren't any further questions from councillors, then we'll move to the first full item on the papers today, which is the budget proposals 23 to 27. And as is the protocol, I will call Mr. Smith in first to give the technical run through of the document, and then I will add some further comments afterwards. So, Mr. Smith, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, in front of you are record turned around budget proposals, as acknowledged, and my thanks for the acknowledgement that officers, members had to turn this around within 48 hours of receipt of the settlement. I will at the end bring it back over to yourself, Chair. There are 4 recommendations in front of you, which are to kickstart the proposals for consultation, and the planning assumptions are being refreshed as a result of the national developments across the UK and as a result of last week's Welsh Government settlement and the local government settlement that flows from that. I won't repeat what's in the report verbatim because the report is quite lengthy and there's a lot to get through. But it is clear. I'll draw your attention to some of the pertinent matters that I think is appropriate to give technical advice on. This has been refreshed as a result of the autumn budget statement and the settlement. So that's referenced in section 1.7, which indicates that we were led to believe we'd get a 3.5% increase in grants. Getting well over 7% clearly helps the position. But there is an element of deja vu with last year's budget proposals, where it was a heavily front-loaded settlement, 9 followed by 3 followed by 2. At the moment, we have a settlement of 7.6%, followed by 3, followed by probably at best 2. And I think, as what comments have been made already do indicate, whilst there's nominal money in the system, it doesn't touch the sides of the real pressures that we are all facing across public services and in our own lives at home for all of our communities. If I draw your attention directly to section 3.1, a reminder that whilst today is about focusing on the net budget and potential consideration around council tax to come in due course, our gross budget is well over 800 million as opposed to the 500 and something million pounds net, and some of those specific grants are yet to be firmed up on, as you've indicated, Chair. Section 3.6 indicates that the headline increase was a £31 million increase. That included money for Mumble's Coastal Risk Management Programme scheme. And when you agreed that scheme, there was concern to make sure that we were fully funded for that in the settlement. And I'm pleased to advise that I am satisfied that that was funded in full by Welsh Government and is recognised in the figures. And that's why the Welsh Government rightly reflects it on a like-for-like basis. At the moment, there are no other funny adjustments in the settlement. However, recently Welsh Government have indicated there will be a technical adjustment in relation to fire, and overnight the Chief Exec and myself have received another letter from fire indicating that they are under yet more pressure. I will touch upon that very briefly in a moment. We're in the second year of an original 3-year deal, and it remains helpful to have those indicative planning assumptions. It remains doubly helpful to get more than double the money we were expecting. But the outlook longer term remains really challenging as set out in section 3.7. Table 1 is probably the most important, and again I'm not going to pull out all of the main items, but one of the biggest problems we had was when we set the budget for 22-23, it was before we even knew what the 21-22 pay award was, let alone 22-23s. And as the leader has often recognised, we set neither local government pay or teachers' pay. So there's a huge element of catch up here, given we are overspent in the current year like every authority in the land. I have budgeted for a 3.5% increase in teachers' pay for next year because that's what the pay review body has recommended to Welsh Government. I don't know if it will come to pass or not. I have equally budgeted for a very similar local government pay award compared to the current year, which is worth about 7%. Welsh Government in their settlement have made very clear it has been a front-loaded settlement. There is no more money. So if pay awards go higher, inflation goes higher, anything else crops up, you're on your own effectively, was the message to local government. But I do have to accept and acknowledge, as has already been mentioned, look, there were clear Barnet consequentials coming to Wales. And in the end, the first significant consequential was in respect of business rates relief to businesses, followed clearly by schools, which is important in a Welsh context because that's in the revenue support grant, then the NHS, then social care. And for the first time I can remember, if you take the money for the social care and education funding, it's more than the NHS got. And clearly, I think Welsh Government did listen to all of the lobbying from individual authorities, the lobbying done by the Welsh Local Government Association, and indicated that we are their trusted delivery partner locally. And there was a need to put significant sums of nominal cash in, notwithstanding there are real pressures in the system. The table indicates I've provided for uplifts for the national living wage, the real living wage, and an expectation that the local government nationally negotiated pay bill will continue for local government not to be a bare minimum real living wage, national living wage employer. Line 4 note indicates that pension costs are in at zero for the next 3 years, and I wish to pay tribute to Mr. Dong and his pensions team for particularly being able to deliver a potentially no increase, saving £5 million a year on our revenue-based budget for the next 3 years. Note that the rest of note 5 indicates that in future years there is a risk around teachers' pensions. I've put in a prudent worst case scenario and schools have been advised accordingly. As has been referenced in terms of inflation, I have had to take the bulk of all inflation provisions and set them aside for the huge spike in energy costs, and that's why you've got line 6 indicating £15 million in for energy price inflation, but in the line above next to nothing available for other inflationary matters. So budgets are undoubtedly being squeezed. Note 7 indicates the amount that's going in for future capital aspirations and also the money that was funded for the Mumble CRMP scheme. I continue to make judicious use of the capital equalisation reserve, and I'm proposing to use reserves to offset equally the energy price costs. I've referenced Mid and West Wales Fire Authority, and as I've indicated, they have already written to us once and indicated material increases in their levy. They're entitled to do that, but they have overnight unfortunately written again saying they're likely to have to increase them again. There may be comment on that in due course. The contingency line 14 is where I put what spare we've got. The reality is at the point at which we pull the budget together in 48 hours, there are some bits and pieces left over, and you've got 2 years where there's a bit of slack and then 2 years where we're slightly short. But that's in the context of a contingency sum where you prudently set a budget ordinarily at council which provides for about £3 million worth of contingency that is available, and you've fully drawn that in the current year. So it is right that at the moment that is held in contingency for my planning purposes. As I've indicated in the report, some of that may need to be taken up if there are changes at final settlement. We've been told by Welsh Government there is a set change in respect of fire, and fire have written to us indicating there are going to be 2 changes, both upwards, unfortunately, in terms of their likely levy. The report table indicates overall, in nominal terms, how materially the budget is going to increase. You've got £150 million worth of known pressures in that table, and savings requirements of over £60 million. But it still means that in overall terms, material sums of money are going in nominal terms in all years. But as has been indicated, they are really challenging in real terms overall. The rest of the notes I won't go through. I think I've teased out the important ones. I'm now going to jump on and indicate that, look, we are hugely dependent on what Welsh Government decides to give us, and I accept Welsh Government is hugely dependent on what UK Government decides to give them. So section 4.8 sets out how sensitive our budget planning assumptions are to the level of grant increases, and in normal fashion some scenarios have been modelled there for you. Section 4.11 indicates that the general capital allocation is reverted to normal type, and so sets out how we would propose to allocate it, and there's a small residual sum available for consideration as we progress through the budget setting cycle. 4.16 recognises the aspiration for an additional £50 million worth of borrowing over the lifetime of the medium-term financial plan, and at the moment the capital financing is loaded towards the end of the cycle because, as you're aware, I intend to use our cash balances and reserves to buy as much time before I have to go out and externalise the rest of the net debt that may be added to the budget as a result of that decision yet to be taken, but it remains a prudent planning assumption. If I take you through to section 5.5 and the table 5, it indicates where the savings fall. And the savings predominantly in money terms fall on place, but that is predominantly because they are best placed to be able to raise fees and charges, and that is part of the overall strategy. Social services, by nature of its size, is still a big savings ask, but it's only the savings side of it. There's more on the other side being invested in. And you can see a relatively proportionately large savings ask of corporate services and finance, and a relatively small savings ask of schools when you think about how big their budgets are compared to the rest of the authority. Section 5.6 does firm up on matters that we've mentioned in Cabinet and Council over previous months, Leader, around the Energy Fund, and I am pleased to say that whilst it is only technically in for a year temporarily as a funding guarantee, the planning assumptions I've set out do lead me to believe I can afford it for all of the 4 years of that sort of level. And there is a little bit of good news. We do pre-buy most of our energy, and it does look as though there'll be some slight reduction in our overall expected increase. Hey, it's not going to be a 400% increase, it might only be 300 and something percent increase. But rather than look to reduce the amount set aside for that fund, I've been able to recalibrate it and recommend to you that 50-50 for council and schools for the reason you've referred to in previous meetings with school head teachers, but there's a couple of £1 million we can set aside for key strategic partners, those that are high energy intensive users, and we're able to give an indication that we've got that available locally again. And the most important part of that energy fund decision that I'm asking you to take in principle is it decouples energy spikes from having to reduce the budget elsewhere, given the biggest part of your budget is staffing. That plus the other judicious use of reserves buys you an awful lot of time to be able to reshape your budget and see what happens over time. If I draw your attention then to section 5.9 and table 7, big pause for breath. Look, I've given advice over the last couple of months to Cabinet and Council, have been in quite a dark place, and I would have been in that very, very dark place. Our settlement is £16 million higher in cash, like for like, than it would have been. That 22 million, if we hadn't had £7 million worth of national insurance and pension savings, if we didn't have £16 million more in the settlement, if we didn't have a £15 million energy fund, that would have been a £60 million table, which is what I gave you advice on all along. So it's massively improved. It is also the case that when you look at that figure of 22 million and see what's doing the lifting, the biggest part of the lifting is technical trickery on national insurance and pensions, but safe technical trickery, followed by targeted income increases for service users. Not great, but inflation's pretty high and it's in line with inflation. So you're being asked to make a strategic allocation that says you expect service users and income paid to take quite a bit of the lifting. The smallest end item is workforce, and given that's our biggest component of spend, I think you as cabinet members and officers have worked incredibly hard to minimise the impact on the workforce overall, and that table shows that very, very clearly. If I draw your attention then to table 8 and the main pressures on schools, as you referenced, Leader, yourself, I and others met with head teachers yesterday, and it is clear that we are passing on as much as we can and what we can clearly identify in the settlement to schools. It doesn't 100% fund all schools' pressures, but 10 million of a £13 million estimate plus a £6.5 million energy price guarantee, I think is very generous in the overall settlement that we've got. And I think certainly the School Budget Forum, the school trade unions have indicated that in initial discussions, and I think head teachers were equally receptive yesterday to your presentation, Leader. I draw your attention then to table 9 in section 5.16. The important thing is you have a credible lawful budget on these planning assumptions. I can give you technical advice that says you can balance the budget on this basis. There are concerns then set out in section 6.2. Specific grants remain a concern. It does look like most specific grants are flatlined. There are some slight increases, but we're not going to be seeing 10% increases in specific grants. So the spend power will be eroded there. And there are clear ongoing risks with the current year's overspending. And if inflation doesn't start to come down significantly, it is clear that the real term spending power of this council and all councils will continue to be eroded. So there are some real risks. I think I've been as pragmatic as I can be in terms of deploying judicious use of reserves to stave off what could have been a worse position, but also taking advantage of the much more generous settlement we've got. I think I've then got to just draw your attention ultimately to table 10, which sets out the posts potentially at risk, and I emphasise potentially at risk because we take an extremely prudent and cautious approach for budget reporting purposes. The vast majority of those 68 posts placed at risk with the council are likely to be vacancies and volunteers for departure on mutually agreed grounds, but it does not eliminate at this stage the risk of there being some compulsory redundancies. And it is clear we will continue to use all mitigations available to seek to reduce that further. So the schools figure is put in at naught, as is often the case at this point in time. Given the relative generosity of your proposals to schools, I do not see any need for schools to collectively think that they need to have large scale reductions, but obviously individual decisions will be taken by individual governing bodies and it will reflect the circumstances of individual schools. Section 11 sets out the indicative timeline, which is in line with previous years. I'm not going to speak about the rest of the report. I'm going to summarise by indicating, as I said, that 22 treasurers in Wales were in a dark place for the last few months, and we have worked on the basis that we had very, very unpalatable options. And I would equally want to pay tribute to my colleague heads of service, directors and cabinet members for sticking with what has been a long, arduous process, going through all options if the worst did happen. But the most nice bit to be able to do was, in the last week, get the jumbo red felt tip marker out and start crossing through many of the options that you would have otherwise had to have taken if it hadn't been for the significant settlement. And my final comment before I hand back to yourself is I would wish to especially acknowledge the work done by Sarah Willis. She is acknowledged as a joint report author with myself, that all of my staff work hard, all staff work hard, but this has had to be turned around in 48 hours. It's the fastest we've ever done it. There may be a few bits at the margin that need to be wrinkled out. There may be some concerns over some of the proposals at the margin, but I think you have a credible set of proposals that enable you to take this forward today as your planning assumptions. And if I look at that table with the £22 million worth of savings, if we didn't have a much better settlement, if we didn't have those technical trickeries that we were able to do, if we hadn't established that energy fund, you would have had a figure 3 times the size. And there is a reason why we have been concerned as a council, why we've all been concerned in public services around the outlook. It is clearly much better and it gives us a lot more wiggle room and a lot more time to work on things. But as you've rightly acknowledged repeatedly, Leader, the real term spending power of this council and all councils will continue to be eroded given the levels of inflation, the cost of living pressures that everyone faces, and the longer term outlook does not still look particularly attractive. I will stop there and hand over to yourself, but we'll just remind you that there are 4 recommendations before you if you're content to take them forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. And again, thank you for the work that's been done. And I specifically concur with your thanks to Sarah, who's been brilliant in supporting this process, and she should be rightly commended for the work that she's done there. I'm happy to formally move the 4 recommendations on page 1. Could I look for a seconder first, please? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lewis. In terms of adding to what you've said, I think a few other things I would wish to draw people's attention to. Firstly, this is the first year where local government in Wales has had a settlement which is better than health in Wales, and that doesn't happen by accident. It's done through significant lobbying, which has been done through the WLGA, and I pay absolute respect to my colleagues who have assisted and been there in terms of making those arguments about the impacts of social care, schools, communities to ministers in Welsh Government. And I'm grateful that the ministers have listened and have therefore adjusted the settlement this year. In addition to that, of course, it is in contrast to the fact that we have still a significant energy pressure, which we are having to deal with locally. That is something that was written out, as I've said before, as a specific exclusion within the UK government's budget when they laid it earlier this year. That is something that I still believe was immoral and wrong, and we will continue to press UK government for schools care homes, community buildings and other public sectors services to receive help as part of the energy package that the government is able to provide. It is only the UK government and only the UK government Treasury that can provide help at that level. So the £15 million which we've set aside was a new economic recovery fund which this council set up to assist communities and businesses recover from the pandemic and to invest in our own growth in this region. That has had to be directed into the energy fund to help schools and other services deal with energy bills. And that was because, again, if we were to turn that energy bill into council tax, that would see a council tax in Swansea of at least 15% just on energy. We were not prepared to accept a figure of that, given the fact that we have a cost of living crisis, that many residents in Swansea will be suffering and will be struggling as they are across the UK. And that brings me to the context around the fire levy. Again, Mr. Smith, with yours and the legal officer's advice, I intend to write in the strongest possible terms to the Fire Authority to voice concerns around the proposed levy, but also the additions that you've mentioned today. I know other leaders across Wales are equally concerned. Just to put it into context for those that do not follow the numbers, a 14% increase in the fire levy will mean an additional £2 million being required to be found within this authority because the money is drawn from within the reserves of this authority. That will mean, in essence, an automatic 2% uplift to council tax, which will flow directly out of this authority. Now, I do not for a minute think that the fire service and the fire authority, like every other service in the UK, is under pressure, like this council is under pressure, like schools are under pressure, like social services are under pressure. But we have to balance that against the pressures on our residents. And if the 14% is something that is approved, then that will have an impact on residents across Swansea and will have an impact on their bills. So again, I will take advice in terms of how far I'm able to go, because this is a decision for the Fire Authority. I respect that, but that decision has to be taken, I think, in the context of the impacts it will have on taxpayers and residents of Swansea. Turning to the savings, again, in Appendix B, as you've said, Mr. Smith, what we have tried to do is to ensure that we focus on adjusting income and raising income where we can. And in doing so, we've also tried to think imaginatively about how we do that. I know that Councillor Lewis and Councillor Stevens previously and others have been working with Sarah Corkin and other officers on the provision of a new residents benefits app. And this application, when it's live, will allow residents of Swansea to access services at potentially a lower rate than those people who visit Swansea. And I think that is right. It's an important principle that if you live in Swansea, you should have a benefit for living in Swansea, and therefore that forms part of our budget proposals today in terms of asking the public, do they support that approach, and do they support the potential for discounts for residents in Swansea on certain services, and that would include potentially parking charges in our council car parks, where residents potentially would be able to pay a lower rate than those visiting the city. In addition, as you mentioned, Mr. Smith, we have tried wherever possible to avoid jobs losses. And again, you know, it's remarkable in terms of the potential hundreds of jobs that were at risk now being reduced down, as you say, to just over 60, with many of those posts already vacant or where they are filled with people who are already expressed an interest where they may wish to leave employment early. So again, I share the wishes that I know Cabinet have as well, that we would avoid compulsory redundancies this year and that we'll take every measure to do that. I think given where we are and given the help that we've had from Welsh Government, this is a much more pleasant budget to bring forward, albeit with still some pressures in there, but a much more positive budget than we otherwise would. It doesn't mean that we are by any means out of the woods, and like all other councils across Wales, the future years still look extremely challenging, and if UK government sticks to the proposals that it's published recently, that will mean that in 2 or 3 years' time, there are some very, very challenging funding arrangements that UK government are proposing to impose across the UK. I hope they change tack from that. And in fact, as you'll not be surprised from me, I hope that the electorate get a chance to change the government in London before that comes to pass. But we will see what the general election brings. But with that, Chair, I'm sorry, with that, I am the Chair. With that, I will again formally move the report. I know Councillor Lewis has formally seconded, and I will open it up to Cabinet members if they wish to make any comments in terms of any specific sections of the budget. Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Leader. It's not necessarily a specific section of the budget, but I wanted to just add my thanks to you and to the other leaders. This more positive settlement hasn't happened by accident. This has happened by many, many meetings with ministers, and I want to thank you for that. And I also want to add my thanks to Ben Smith and the team who've worked incredibly hard. And I think this has been one of the most challenging budget years in terms of timing and deadlines and crazy antics in UK government, which has really thrown us into financial despair. And so against that backdrop, I want to pay tribute to Mr. Smith and his team for all the work that they do. And also throughout this year, all the grants and extra finance that has been given to residents. You know, the team have been under immense pressure to deliver those grants. So well done to him and well done to you and the leaders.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you as well, and Mr. Smith and his team. It's been, well, I was going to say appreciated. I don't think it is appreciated. Actually, the work that's been put in over the last month or so, where you've brought this budget to the cabinet, and everybody's worked extremely hard to get a budget that is legal, that we can put forward. I don't think anybody's happy with the budget. In fact, I don't believe anybody's happy with the budget. But I would re-echo your words about our members of the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority. I hope they make the strongest representation they can to put in a 14% increase. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could have put a 14% increase on our budget overall? That is making a 2% difference, as you said, on a council tax. And it's going to cost us £2 million extra. Now, we've had to make some very hard decisions on where we save money. And I would have hoped that the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority would have gone through the same exercise to make those same savings themselves. And I'm sure they wouldn't be happy having to make those savings, but neither our education budget, our social services budget, our police budget, all the things that we've had to make hard decisions on. It seems as if the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority every year just come along and the pressures they have are just then passed on to the various local authorities in that region to make up their shortfall. Now, I think they need to have a close look at their budget and make some of the decisions, and not popular decisions that we've had to make, is to come in on budget. You know, some of the decisions we've made, that we've taken money out of the ERF fund to support our budget, but that is money that's not going to be spent elsewhere, which we had hoped to have this economic recovery after the years that we've gone through, and the 12 years of austerity, but since COVID, especially the hardships that has brought upon us. So I'd like to thank you, Leader, and Ben and his team. They've done a great job. I'm far from happy with the budget, and I'm sure we all are. I'm sure you, Leader, are not happy with the budget, but we made the best of the job that's in hand, and the representations you've made to ministers who have listened to you, and others within the WLGA. So thank you very much for those. I suppose we will hope that as the year goes on, that central government will make decisions that will help us, especially with our electricity and gas bills, because you know, an extra £15 million to find. I think they have a moral responsibility to local government. You know, we are saying to the public, use our community centres, use our libraries, use our galleries, etc., to keep warm. Well, they're only keeping warm because the extra money now that we've got to find, and I would hope that common sense will prevail. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. Very much agree with all of that. Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and I'd echo all the thanks to you for the political leadership and also the officers for their input into this budget. As far as the education and schools budget is concerned, I think this shows that we are recognising the pressures that schools are facing, unprecedented times in terms of coming out of the COVID period, the loss of impetus within the education system caused by 2 years, 3 years of disruption. In addition, the implementation of the ALNET Act, the implementation of a new curriculum, these are challenging times for our schools. If this budget is passed, then clearly the schools still face many challenging decisions. We recognise that. But I think if you compare what we have in front of us today with what it looked like a matter of days, if not certainly weeks ago, then we are in a totally different ballgame. And I would echo the thanks to you for the lobbying and the work that's been done to get a more appropriate settlement from Welsh Government. Let's face it, we are not in a land of milk and honey, and schools won't be in a land of milk and honey, but I think this is a lot better than what had been envisaged, as I said, even a matter of days ago. So I would echo the comments in relation to the budget.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith, and appreciate the comments very much. And again, thank you for the work that you and other Cabinet members have done to support getting us to this point. Councillor Gibbard.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I won't sort of labour the point, but just, you know, really, as Councillor Smith just said, I really recognise this. You know, this could have been an awful lot worse, but still, it still leads to some very difficult choices, and just want to recognise the pressures that staff are under in social services, adult and child and family services, and also that the people that we work with across Swansea. And it just breaks my heart really that yet again people on the ground in Swansea, our staff, our families, are forced to live with the political decisions that are being made up in Westminster, and it's not our fault.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Gibbard. Absolutely. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I'm aware that Councillor Stevens has indicated he wishes to declare an interest. So, Councillor Stevens, before we go to the vote, I'll give you an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I should have declared at the start, but yeah, I've got a personal interest only with my wife working in the school.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, just for the record, I know Councillor Hopkins has been trying to join the meeting but is unable to do so. If we go to record Councillor Hopkins, apologies, please, if that's okay. Okay, with that.
Apologies, Leader. My husband also works in a school, if I should declare a personal interest.
Yes, please. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gibbard.
I remember I should have thought my daughter works in social services, so personal, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pugh. Any other declarations before we go to the vote? No. Okay, again, it's not an electronic vote today, so it'll be a show of physical hands. So the recommendations on page 1 have been moved and seconded. Can I ask you all to show whether you're in approval of those recommendations? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. And that concludes the meeting for today and our last meeting of the year. Once again, can I all thank you very much for all your efforts. Please pass on my thanks to the staff in your departments, and can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy 2023. Thank you, colleagues.